This place just reeks of history. The lane that I'm on now is coming up to the city's oldest, one of its oldest landmarks, and that is the Hisar Kapia Gate, which is Turkish for Castle Gate. This was, of course, rebuilt during Ottoman times, but it is still over 1,000 years old. And the Ottomans, of course, built it on top of a similar gate that was of Roman origin. So if this were 500, 800, 1,000 years ago, I would be entering the castle now. I would have already entered the castle from back there. But of course, the castle is sort of partially in one's imagination and partially still standing. In fact, many of the old homes here have been built on foundations of the castle walls. To get up here from Kapana, by the way, it's easy. Just to go under a pedestrian tunnel which separates the two sections of town underneath a busy thoroughfare, and then just pick your cobble street as long as it goes up. That church tower you see behind me is the tower that belongs to a centuries-old Orthodox church. You can't really see the church itself or the high wall in front of it and beside it, but that's a story in itself. In Ottoman times, there was an attempt to be tolerant toward Christians to a certain extent. One of the rules of the age were that churches could exist, Christian churches that is, but they could not be seen publicly. In fact, the metric used was that a person riding on horseback in the street should not be able to see a Christian church over the wall in front of it. Hence you have this wall that completely covered the church, and after the end of the Ottoman Empire, of course, that church tower was constructed. Even though the fortress is closed, there's another very special place of antiquity I want to show you on this hill. This is perhaps the crown jewel of Plovdiv's considerable antiquities, one of the best preserved ancient Roman theaters in the world, the theater of the former Philippopolis. As with many Roman theaters elsewhere, you can tell from the steps here that the design was not with safety upmost in mind. Look at the width and the irregularity of these steps. You could very easily fall to your death just, going to see someone else being eaten by a lion. One of the most amazing things about this place, about what you see here, was that it was only discovered in the 1970s as the result of a landslide. The landslide exposed enough to determine what was underneath, and that prompted a major dig that revealed the rest. Steps in the center of the theater onto the big stage, but I'm going to resist the urge to sing, even though I have quite an audience up above. Well, it's not a packed house, but you know what I mean. This theater, which was designed to seat about 7,000 people, most likely was built under Roman Emperor Domitian in the 1st century CE. And it's not just a relic. It's still in use today for plays, for music concerts, and other activities. But because there are events held here, there's a permanent setup for lighting and sound. But still, I'm just imagining as I come out to the precipice of this beautiful structure so well preserved, and wondering what it would have been like to be here, to enter this great structure in the 1st century and see this. The statue behind me of our beloved Plovdiv citizen, known eternally as Sasha the sweetheart, a classically trained musician who, after the communist takeover post-World War II, was banished to Sofia, where he rose to become a very popular singer nonetheless. I should say a popular musician, not a singer. He played the violin. And during one inauspicious session in which a chief party leader attended, the party leader complimented him for his music. And Sasha unfortunately told a joke that the party leader, he thought, was perhaps at his expense. Sasha was banished to prison and then died after being sent to a prison camp. But his memory lives on here in Plovdiv. Sasha, the sweetheart. In the 1990s, the city commissioned an artist to do 3 statues of actual people whose lives resonated with residents here, regardless of whether they were considered important or famous. And one of the 3 figures that the artist chose is the statue of the person behind me, a character named Milo, a street person in a sense, in that he was always on this walking street, and before the walking street, he was always on the main street here when there were cars plying up and down it. A character with humor and whom everybody in town seemed to know. And so long after his death, he's immortalized here on this choice spot as a beloved figure of modern Plovdiv. I'm walking down Knaz Alexander Street in the heart of Plovdiv, which just happens to be the longest pedestrian street in Europe, some 1.8 kilometers long. This is a Monday, and although the place is always lively, I arrived here over the weekend and it was positively teeming with people. As you can see, the cafes and restaurants spill out onto the street. Everything sort of moves out of doors here, except I'm sure in the winter, giving this place a sort of aura of a state fair midway. Many of the buildings along this street are from the late 1800s, and that relates directly to what was happening in Bulgaria at the time, namely its liberation from the Ottoman Empire. Of course, it wasn't a pedestrian street then, but after liberation, the city's leaders decided the most important street in town deserved a facelift. And so they undertook a massive, years-long replacement of the former wooden buildings that lined this street. And they chose an Austrian architect to do it, which is pretty obviously why many of the buildings have a Viennese flair. The city's Greco-Roman ruins may be the most visible part of its legacy, but they're only part of Plovdiv's history. I'm in front of another city landmark, the Zumaya Mosque, or Friday Mosque, here in the center of the city, whose original structure occupied this spot since the year 1363. Prayer time is about to start soon, and so the woman behind me is vacuuming. That's the noise you may hear in the background. But it shouldn't be a surprise that this church has endured. About 10% of Bulgaria's 6 million people are Muslim, constituting the second largest religion in the country behind Eastern Orthodox. And we are, after all, less than 100 miles from the Turkish border. Just up ahead, the street enters a gigantic public plaza that would be the envy of cities many times Plovdiv's size. That's where I'm headed, because I want to show you something. What you're looking at is part of the city's ancient Roman forum, or marketplace. The Greeks call them agoras. And this one is huge. Long before the space was cleared for this plaza, successive eras of buildings were constructed on top of these ruins. What you're seeing here is only a small part of what's exposed, without builders ever realizing what lay underneath. I'm in a larger section of ruins now that you can peer down into from the plaza level above, or do as I'm doing and stroll along the ancient walkways themselves. Besides this giant marketplace, Roman Plovdiv includes a theater, an amphitheater, and a giant stadium, at least among the things that we know about yet. This was built by Emperor Hadrian in the 2nd century CE, who apparently took a liking to the place on the northern frontier. One of the things that's quite amazing about these ruins is that, unlike in Italy or Greece, it's anybody's privilege to walk around among the scattered ruins here, to touch the ancient stones. In fact, there are shards and other things on the ground here that appear to be largely undisturbed, or else they would have been picked clean long ago. By Hadrian's day, Plovdiv had long been called Philippopolis in honor of the Macedonian Emperor Philip the Great, who developed the city extensively in the 4th century BC and gave his name to it. If you're unfamiliar with Philip, you probably have heard of his son, Alexander the Great.